Sveiki visiem! Es esmu Lelda Bērziņa, un jūs klausāties līderībai un korporatīvai izaugsmai veltīto podkāstu Līdera kompass, kas tapis sadarbībā ar Adizes institūtu Latvijā. Šajā epizodē izgaismosim 2021. gada ierakstu viesus, spilgtākos izaicinājumus un secinājumus, un saruna šoreiz notiks angļu valodā. In this episode, we will look back at the highlights of the year 2021, episodes and main issues discussed, so that we are ready for a better version of ourselves and our teams in 2022. And today at the studio we have a very special guest, Greg Mathers. Hi, Greg.
Hi, nice to be here.
Who doesn't know, Greg is the Managing Director of Adizes Institute in Latvia, Senior Associate at Adizes Institute, MBA Director and Lecturer at RBS or Riga Business School, and experienced entrepreneur. Right, Greg?
Most of it's right.
Okay. And as well as my colleague. Nice to have you here, Greg. Happy to welcome you at Leaders Compass.
Oh, thanks. It's really an honor to get to be here, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's a snowy day, and you had to drive for quite a while to get here. So thanks for having me, and I'm really glad to be here.
Actually, you're a part of the podcast as well. You're from Adizes, and this is Leaders Compass, supported by Adizes Institute in Latvia. To start, I would like to ask you, what was the funniest or most uncomfortable situation in 2021 you experienced as manager?
As a manager, most uncomfortable or funniest? Well, I could tell you about a situation I had with somebody that wrote me a message, which I found quite interesting.
Okay.
We have several clients here, and a few we've worked with for a number of years. One specific client has a couple of awards, and one of those awards they attributed to work with us. And so they wrote an article about it and posted it. And somebody read the article, a local person, and wrote me a message. And the message was that they really liked the article, but the director of the company was such a bad manager that we should not associate ourselves with them. And I found that quite interesting. And this was from a local management consultant.
Okay.
And you know, what's the message to take away from that? That you only work with good managers as a consultant? Or, you know, this was a company that was really struggling and an owner that needed help. And his message was, we shouldn't work with those people.
What did you respond?
I just wrote back to him, thanks for his advice, and offered him a book to read. That kind of explains what we do. And you know, and I also explained that these are exactly the types of companies that need help.
Yeah.
And types of managers. So that was maybe the funniest. When I read that, I just kind of laughed out loud.
I would laugh too, yeah. And the book, that's brilliant. I mean, maybe he will find some useful information there.
I hope so. Didn't hear back from him either.
And basically you touched the question about main issues what you have had in 2021 as working with clients and managers and companies. So
some of the main issues here in Latvia that we deal with, and you know, they're probably pretty common around the world. In other places I've been, I've seen similar things. But really in Latvia, what's happening now is a lot of transition going on. Because there's only been this market economy here since the early 90s. And a lot of people, a lot of men and women started their companies at that time. They've been running them now for many, many years, couple decades. And they're getting ready for the next generation, and there has to be some kind of transition to go on. So how do they get their companies to continue beyond them is a challenge, right? What is the succession that's going to happen? And so, you know, the big issue we see in that is that we find a lot of company owners that haven't built a management team that can take over. And really that's a big challenge, is how do you move from this entrepreneurial manager where you have this really talented individual that's built this company? How can he transition all of his knowledge and experience and entrepreneurial value to a team that can take over and continue the business so that it continues to grow and develop. And that's really the big challenge that we're looking at right now is how do we get companies to make that transition?
Yeah. We talked with some of the guests about sustainability too. The management and corporate governance question was also an issue, which is actually really important into how companies are evaluated in Latvia. But somehow the real transition happens really slow.
It's not an easy transition to make.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is tied up in the ego of the founder. Because, they've built a company, they've gotten rich, they've gotten famous, a lot of them, right? They're talked about in the media, they're looked up to. They have their own little kingdoms where if they say something, tell people to do something, it gets done. And, who wants to give that up?
Yeah. What about circumstances of environment? Does that affect?
A lot of these managers or owners, they understand that they need to make a transition, that they're not going to be there forever. A lot of them have become bottlenecks in the company because, everything has to go through them, a lot of the major decisions. And they realize intellectually and emotionally that they need to build a management team and that they need to somehow step aside and let somebody take over. But they don't do it. And really, the driving force that gets them to move forward on that is it often takes a crisis. Right?
Yep.
And that's what we've seen is that, companies come to us and say, we need help when there's a crisis. Mm-hmm. So they know they need to do it, but they can't do it until they're pushed to do it. And a lot of that, again, is ego.
You touched some of my topics. Basically, from 2021, I have searched these interesting things and come up to three main, as we can say, issues. One of them is mature manager, or the opposite. And why am I saying that? Because we had this season 1, episode 1 with Martin Špičevskis. This episode was called Sailing into Leadership Challenges. And he said that often enough, the ego is the thing which is as an issue to become a really good leader. He compared this when you're sitting into a ship or something, trying to, you have this energy and you're pulling and pulling and pulling, trying to turn this ship, and you don't know where you're going actually. So the ego can be an issue. And the question is, what actually is a mature manager nowadays? And can ego be the enemy? What do you think?
It's an interesting question. And I think it depends on the stage of development of the company. Because in a startup, right, you have to have somebody with some ego, right? They have to have some arrogance to believe that they can go out and do something and improve on what's out there, and somehow they're going to change the world, right? So you need that ego and that arrogance, and that's what it takes to actually start the company and drive it to success. Is you have to have that leader who believes in themselves and believes in their product and is something of a prophet coming to bring something to the world. And without that, it's really, really difficult to get a company to work, right? They've got energy, they've got vision, lots of excitement and drive, and they push and push till they get what they want. But at the same time, once the company is established, that can get in the way, right? So mature manager, I would say, is somebody who's got some flexibility, right? At certain times, they can drive and push, and they know when to do that. Other times, they can take more of a back seat and let the team take over and let people take chances and risks and do things on their own. And so when I think about a mature manager, it's somebody that knows themselves, knows what their strengths and weaknesses are, knows their effect on other people, and knows when to push and when to come back and hold back and let others take over. And it all really changes as a company grows and develops. Right? When it's a startup, you need one management style. When it's fast growth, you need another management style. Once it becomes mature, you need another management style or leadership style. And not everybody can do that. There's no reason somebody should be able to do all of that, right? We've got other people around us, and so we can build a team that can bring in those different styles when needed.
Yeah, I think you touched important topic regarding the manager and the leader. What I would add probably would be, as you said, that a mature manager actually he becomes a leader when he knows his weaknesses and strengths, when he knows the influence on others, he knows how to work with others. And I believe what is important to support your subordinates to focus on the action, not to criticize and to pull down. I believe it's really important to have that. And then there may be, then this ego who's like this super energetic person maybe has to be put in some kind of box a little bit to at least know what he's weak at and to work on it, to focus on it. Because the last thing I read and learned at some seminars was that you cannot lose a focus, especially what's regarding behavior and emotions, because the real leader controls it. He doesn't let you can go on a boat wherever if you don't have some kind of guidance in front of you. What would you do, Greg, if you have this immature manager in front of you? What to do with him? I mean, if, for example, it's your employee.
So in our work with companies, we run into this issue all the time, right, of an immature manager. And what happens when you have an immature manager, right? That's an interesting question. And what we tend to see is that they try to control things. Right? They're afraid of making mistakes. They're afraid that others will make mistakes. They're afraid of losing what they've built. And so they exercise a lot of control. And so in our work with these managers, what we need to do is build in them the confidence that their people can actually do things, right? So that they can let go. And it's not an easy process, and it takes a while. But we start, by identifying some issues, putting their people in teams to work on those issues, and we get them not to delegate to a person, but to delegate to a team, right? Because a team has a better chance of succeeding than just an individual. It may take them a little longer to go through decision-making process and all of that, but at the end of the day, if they have a good process where they can sit and discuss things and come up with ideas and solutions and implement those, they'll do pretty well. And as a manager sees them, being able to do that, to take an issue and actually deal with it, they start to develop more confidence in those people. And so that's really the way that we approach it is, how do you get a person to delegate to a team rather than just to individuals, right? Which means it has to be an appropriate task. You don't want to delegate something too simple, but something that they have control over and that they can actually deal with. And as they do that, then their self-confidence grows and the confidence of the manager grows. And then they can take on some bigger challenges.
Interesting how you talked about this control and that they're being afraid of something. I believe we sometimes, use this management style survey. It's the background, what comes as a baggage, we can say, together with a manager, and it influences the action of a manager, the way how he approaches his team as well.
And where does this actually come from? A lot of it comes from our management education, because we're trained that a manager is a decision maker. We're trained that leaders are strong individuals that know the right way to go and the right things to do. And that's the way management has been for a long time, that there's this, super person that can lead. And when somebody's in a position where that's the expectation on them, it can be quite scary. And especially if they don't have the confidence. And really what we need to do is look at a new management model, which is not the individual leader. but more of the team-based model. And we're starting to see that transition with different methodologies coming out, but it's slow. It's been a long time coming, and it's really needed.
True. I also remembered how Carlos, he was our guest on season 1, episode 7, about the right decisions, not the wrong answers. And he said, if you don't have ethics, then first two things, intelligence and energy, will bring you to grave. If you don't have ethics, that's basically a recipe for disaster. What do you say about that?
We see it all the time that you have a lot of intelligent people that are really ambitious, and they take shortcuts. Right? They do things that are ethically right or even illegal to try to get ahead. And it does. It ends up, they get into trouble. And we've seen that over and over again in Latvia with different people. Right? And so there has to be some rules by which we play the game. And people have to play by those rules. And that's why we have all these enforcement policies in place and authorities in place, because there has to be a set of rules by which we play.
Okay, the rules, but ethics, it's like, I believe Carlos also mentioned that, or maybe it wasn't him, but the thought still stays the same, that it comes from the family. I mean, I would say the ethics it's hard thing to teach. Maybe some rules, yes, but ethics, it's...
ethics, I mean, they're norms of behavior, right?
Yeah,
the way we should normally behave, which, you can call them rules, you can call them whatever you want, but they are, the accepted behaviors, which in a sense are rules, right? These are the way you're supposed to act in the business environment. You're supposed to play the game in a certain way. And those, we call them ethics, or we call them rules, and we call them values, but they're all really the same thing. They're just a set of guidelines, principles, policies to which we need to adhere. Otherwise, we get into trouble, and people are taking advantage of each other, and just bad things happen. And not necessarily illegal things, but things like crappy service.
Well, what could be the approach of a manager? For example, if you're an employee or a member of the team, you see that manager is really acting unethically, and you basically don't agree with that. Your suggestions to this team.
So if you have a person who is unethical, you got to consider, can you trust this person? Because there's a story, an interesting story. A guy catches a secretary who's been working for him for 20 years, catches her stealing some money one day, right? Taking some money out of a money box. And she breaks down and she says, I'm so sorry, my son's in trouble. He's sick, he needs some money, he's in the hospital, I really need this, I can't lose the job because he's in trouble. And the question is, what do you do about that? Right? Because that's an ethics issue. She's taking money. Should you give her a second chance? Or should you fire her? And I think the issue is it's not the first time she stole money. It's the first time she got caught.
Actually, that's a tough question, because I don't know, I probably am not the right person to ask if I'm an integrator one. My action is pretty clear. Oh, that's an interesting example, actually. The next topic, the issue which is highlighted in some of our episodes, is a weak team. And actually, that bothered me a lot. I was surprised how much, because we had this season 1, episode 8 with Kaspars Rožkalns from LIA, and we talked about startups, and he said that we have enough ideas, and they're pretty great, but what we're lacking is strong teams. Why is that, and what is actually a weak team, and what is a strong team then? What is the difference between?
When I look at teams and how they work together, there's a couple elements to it. First of all, you have to have mature people, right? You got to have people that you can trust, that you have respect for, okay? So that they can trust and respect each other, because only then are they really going to work together. So that's one element. You have mature people, again, going back to they know their strengths, their weaknesses, and so on. Okay? But then the issue is of are they a high-performing team or not is really a question of the process of how they work together. That's what it is. They're only as strong as their process. Right? If they have a good, strong process by which they can sit down and analyze things and discuss things and agree on things, they've got a much better chance of success than if they sit down and they drift off and they're unfocused and they argue and fight with each other rather than learn from each other. So that's really the issue. Can they learn from each other, or do they just fight with each other? That's a big question. And then how do you get them so that they're engaged? Because that's a big issue. Process is only strong if your people are engaged in the process. And really, engagement is part of the process, and it only becomes about because you have a strong process. We have way too many meetings where you go to a meeting every week and you have, 2 or 3 people who show up and they never say anything. They come to the meetings and they're there, but they never engage. And the reason they're not engaged is because, well, there can be some psychological reasons, but it's not so hard to get them engaged. All you have to do is ask them. Just every meeting, ask them questions and force them to take part in the meeting. Don't let them just sit there. If you're going to just let them sit there and not say anything, don't invite them to the meeting because they're not adding anything. A strong process means you bring together a group of people who can sit and discuss and add value. And if they're not adding any value, then there's no reason for them to be there. So engagement comes about because you force people to be engaged. So you might just put up a question about an issue that you're dealing with and then go around and ask everybody's opinion one at a time, or ask them for ideas. Everybody gives one idea at a time and you go around and around. And now people have to be engaged. And if you get to them and they just say, I don't have any ideas, then why do you need them? Right? You should be paying people to think, not just to show up to meetings.
That's a great saying. Well, actually, I have met, I know some really bright example in this. The processes were great. A big company, all the processes to the highest level. But there's no team, actually. There's some groups, some chit-chats, some forced team events, but there's no team, actually. No cooperation, no trust, no clear vision of how we're going to work together as a team, what's our goal. And I believe there's an important part what touches the manager's issue, for example. How can manager bring together people? Does he bring them together, or does he's not even, participating in these events? So what is the role of a manager in this team building? Because Kasper also mentioned that the startups are a great example in this, that actually ideas are great, but there are no good teams, because the only one who stays at this startup, usually who brings the idea till the end, is this founder or this owner of idea, and he's basically the most engaged. But there's a question of bringing together the people who are right for this company, and they have common interests and common values. Is there a manager's fault, or is there a team's fault, or whose fault is it?
A startup is a really difficult environment. It's like having a baby. Right?
Yeah.
I haven't gone through that experience personally. I've been there when my wife had a baby, but I haven't gone through that. But,
Yeah.
It's a challenge. And launching a startup is not easy. And what it requires from the founders is, in the beginning, they have to have the vision and they have to keep it alive. And they have to keep people engaged in that. And that means giving them meaningful work, right? I mean, letting them try things and go off and really develop something. For instance, you developing this podcast.
True. That's my baby.
Okay. And the founders of the company, it's not easy for them because they tend to be young. They don't have the experience. Where they should be getting the experience is through the different accelerators and startup programs. So, if Kasper's is saying there's not strong teams, I think that Kasper should look at, what are the accelerators and the different startup programs. What are they doing to teach these founders how to engage these people and keep them engaged in their companies? Right? What are they doing to teach them that, the most important thing in a startup is commitment? You've got to have a lot of commitment because you're creating something brand new. Nobody knows if it's going to work, right? Everybody expects it to work, but nobody really knows, and it's not difficult. And you got to have people that are not there just for the money, because there's no money in a startup, right? And if the founder's just interested in money, it's going to fail. And the reason why is you'll make more money going and getting a job. And so if your drive is money, it's too easy to give up. And so the founder needs people that are interested in creating something, right? That they have some passion for doing something to add and create value for the economy, for people, for other companies, for whoever, right? And it's all got to be focused on, we're creating something new, we're creating value, we're providing something that people need, and it's really important. And if you can do that and continuously reinforce it, and you find people that are interested in that, then you have a much better chance of success. But still, it's a really tough.
Yeah, it's a tough. I agree.
To launch a startup and be successful.
You know what? Writers from season 1, episode 3 mentioned. We talked about risks and getting up after failure, and he mentioned that. You have to have a clear agreement of interaction in the team, because he has an example when company, he said, 2 people coming together, you have 5,000, I have 5,000, we have 10,000, let's do the business. And then when the company grows to, I don't know how million he mentioned, it falls apart. Everyone's his piece of pie. And there starts conflicts, and that's it. There's no company. And he got up after, and it's all fine. But I thought of this, how can you find out that the team you have chosen can be trusted? Is it matter of values, which are changed? I don't know. At the beginning, how can you tell?
Trust really is an individual. It's individual to individual. It's not about so much trusting the team, except having confidence in, can the team produce? Okay, that's one thing. That's one level of trust. But really, trusting individuals to do the right thing, that's something else. What I feel is that as soon as there is a person you feel you can't trust, that person should be gone. Don't keep them around, because trust is the only thing you have to build your business on when working with other people. Of course, you got your business plan and all of that to build your business on. But in terms of the people you work with, the only thing you have is trust. And if you lose that, the company's really going to struggle. And this really becomes difficult if all of a sudden it's your partner you feel you can't trust. Okay? There's no easy answers there. And a lot of times it's best to split up, and each takes his part of or her part of the business and goes their separate ways. I mean, the same thing happens in marriages, right? They lose trust in each other, and you have to split up.
That's why you have contract, right?
and that there's in startup, the founder has to be very careful of what they promise in the beginning. They're really vulnerable because it's a dream in the beginning, and they've got all of this energy, and they're saying we're going to build this, and they can promise things like you're going to get a car, and you're going to be a vice president, and you're going to make a lot of money, and people will remember that later. So they have to be careful of what they promise and be realistic. And, a contract is certainly part of that, laying out what are the expectations on both sides.
And I would say a mature manager doesn't have any problems with that. It's normal. There's no conflict. Just
when you're talking about a startup, mature managers tend to be rare.
You're about that, true.
And you've got a founder who probably has some business experience, and maybe a lot of times they've been a manager, and so they may be. But when you're launching a startup, who do you hire to work in it? I mean, friends, family, and fools is the common saying, but you don't hire experienced managers most of the time.
There was that second group he mentioned. The one was that, that these young people coming right out of the university. And the second part, when you have done something, it's about 35, 40 something. When you have some savings and you're just, maybe it's 40-year issue or something. You change your workplace, you change what you do, you change the business, and you turn out to be at the startup.
Uh-huh.
What about that? That's interesting because I would say that age you have to be mature already.
Well, that's certainly true. And it used to be, 20, 30 years ago that most startups were founded by the people you describe, right? They've been managers for a while. They're in their 30s, 40s. But today, you got kids founding companies. And they can be really, really successful. So there's good ideas everywhere. They need guidance and help, and so you've seen all of these startup tools that have come about. But they are immature, and they need the support.
The third topic or issue is about hard decisions and action made only when there's crisis. As you mentioned, you actually touched the third issue about action and decisions which are too late, only when the crisis is already at the door. And we discussed it in a season 1, episode 5 with the Gunther from Kronos. And that was the topic about acknowledging the moments when the style starts to manage. But she mentioned that it's really important for a manager to develop the weaknesses as well. And I asked her about when did the manager understand that it's something has to be changed. She said when it's bad. And actually, a lot of our guests at the podcast said that either they do not understand why people don't think in terms of a long-term vision. For example, they do not look how their decision is going to look after 5 years or how it's going to look in the public. They also mentioned this, that people love this fast solution, and sometimes they're forced to do that because, this budgeting and all these things, they're pushing this. Operational things are pushing managers to do maybe more of a short term. But why do we wait till this crisis arrives? Is there maybe practical suggestions how to avoid that?
One of the biggest problems companies have is their success. Right? Success can be a curse because once you're successful, you know how to make money. Right? You know how to make money today. The problem is that isn't always going to work tomorrow or next year. And so, but we're so busy, caught up in making money today, being successful today, that we tend to be kind of short-sighted and think that that's going to continue to work, but it doesn't. It won't continue to work. And what you're doing today is it should be different than what you're going to be doing next year or the year after. The challenge is that we have everybody so focused on current operations because we have to satisfy clients. We have to deal with suppliers. We have to deal with regulatory issues, quality issues, production issues. We got, it's so complicated to run a business. And then on top of that, we have to optimize all of that, right? So that it works really well, so that we can be profitable. And at the same time, we have to figure out how to change that.
That's funny. Yeah.
Right?
True.
And because it's not going to be working a year from now. And the answer to that, really, when you get to any size, the answer to how to do that, a large part of it is in structure and how the company's structured, is that we need a group of people that are focused on current operations, right? We've got salespeople, production, we got everything we need, and how to make that work really well. And we've got a separate group of people that are focused on the future and what's coming, and what are the trends in the market, and how are we going to have to adjust ourselves, right? And that's structure. And so that means, sales versus marketing. Those two things at some point should be separated, because marketing should be about looking into the market and see how it's changing. And if you're got responsibility for both sales and marketing, right? Sales is going to take all of your attention, right? Because that's where the pain is. Marketing, we can always, the market research and looking at trends, we can do that tomorrow or next week or whatever, because, that's a ways off. But we have to reach the sales numbers now. And if we don't, I'm going to lose some money and I'm going to be in trouble. So, at some point, those things need to separate. And so you have to identify, what are our short-term functions and priorities, and then what are our developmental functions. And we need different people working in those areas. But then again, that creates conflict, because you got some people saying we need to change and other people saying, wait, what we're doing is working. And so again, it comes down to how do we get those people to work together? And again, that comes down to process. What's the process by which we can get together and talk through things and make decisions and learn from each other so that we can move forward?
One of our guests, I remember this example really clearly, that he mentioned, I know it's wrong that we have sales and marketing in one person, but we're a small team. We don't have a budget for that. I mean, I know it's wrong, but what can I do?
So, of course, you don't have enough money to have a lot of different vice presidents. So you have to have somebody that's in charge of sales and marketing. Somebody else is in charge of production and new products, right, which is the change. And so really what you need is some other process in a small company by which we can pay attention to the future. And so one way to do that is just to have a monthly meeting that's set aside. You go off-site and take your management team and maybe some other specialists. And the first month you spend the time, you're not going to make decisions here, you're just going to talk. And so you talk about the future of sales and how should we develop our sales department and what do we need to develop in terms of salespeople and growing the department. Next month, marketing. Month after that, new products. The month after that, finance. And you have your whole management team there. Okay, so you got the people from sales and marketing, production, logistics, whoever. And they discuss these things. And so what they're doing is learning more about the whole company. Right? They're discussing the future of it so that there's always energy there, looking at the future and focus on it. And then whatever issues come up there that need a decision, you can take them to your weekly management meeting, and hopefully they have those.
Hopefully. Yeah, I can swear they have. Okay, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, to plan different meetings and different processes to work on. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. We have come up to the end of our recording, and that's dedicated to new upcoming 2022. So what is your wish or suggestion to managers and teams in 2022?
So as a manager, one of the things you need to do is constantly align your people. They need to all be pulling together in the same direction in your department and then across the company as well. And so as a manager, when you're making decisions about what goes on in your department or in your company, and you're solving problems, what you should think about is this solution going to bring my people closer together, or is it likely to drive them apart? Because we need people working together all the time. We need teamwork. And so that should be one of the critical issues driving your decisions. And so I would hope that people would think about that when they're solving problems. And it's not easy because, there's high pressure, there's time restraints and urgency, and we have to do something right now. And we're not always thinking about what's good for the team and what's going to keep people together. But it needs to be at the forefront all the time. How do we keep this team united? rather than divided, because united we stand, divided we fall.
That's a great suggestion. Really, thank you, Greg. And I think it's really practical as well in terms of a team, whether it brings you together or separates you from each other. Thank you, Greg, for being here and sharing your knowledge and practical approaches. I wish you and all the listeners of the podcast a successful year of 2022. And thank you for listening.
No, thank you, and all the best to you and your family and everybody listening for the holidays.
Paldies, ka klausies podcastu Līdera kompass. Lai nepalaistu garām jaunās epizodes, seko ierakstiem Facebook un LinkedIn. Noklausīties iepriekšējās epizodes var visās podcastu platformās un YouTube. Ja vēlies atbalstīt podcastu darbu, klausies pats un dalies ar tiem, kam būtu saistošs podcastu saturs. Uz tikšanos!